Hi, good morning again. My name is Kim Kroll. I'm the Associate Director of the National SARE program. And as part of our special programming today on SARE and ATTRA, we're going to take a brief look back at the 30 years. And to start off with, we're going to look at SARE's history, and then we'll look at ATTRA's. And we'll have a short conversation, and I'll invite Rob Myers up to the stage now. Rob has served in two roles for SARE. He was the National Director of SARE in the mid-90s, and then more recently serving on the faculty at University of Maryland. He started as our Regional Director of Extension Programs for 2010. Rob? So, before I get started, I just want to raise of hands, how many were at the 10th anniversary conference in Austin, Texas?
Several?
Oh, a few, okay. How many were at the 20th anniversary in Kansas City, Missouri?
Quite a few.
Okay. How many were at the 30th anniversary in, oh yeah, that's it. The trick question, so couldn't help myself. The one amazing thing, though, is that there are a ton of new faces here. So we've got new faces, new voices, which we hope you express this afternoon at our breakout sessions. So Rob and I are just thrilled to death, and just so happy when Thursday gets here. So Rob, yesterday there were some great presentations, and many of those were SARE grant recipients. And we have such a large group here that many people may get the impression that, you know, we've been a great program for many, many years. You were hired back in 1994 by USDA, not long after the program started in '88. What do you recall about those early days with the SARE program?
Well, unlike today when things are kind of humming along pretty smoothly and we've got tremendous support for sustainability across the country, it was a little different then, as some of the folks in the room will remember. In fact, it's been great running into so many people that were involved in the very early years of SARE and have continued to be involved over the years. But when I started in late '94, it was really a rather tumultuous time for sustainable ag and specifically for the SARE program. There were three hurdles we had to get over. One was that there was a lot of skepticism about sustainable ag, not only at USDA and the leadership there, but also just in general across the country among ag leaders. A second was, and this was a more minor issue, that the two agencies that SARE was part of, the old Extension Service and the Cooperative State Research Service, were in the process of merging together, so that created some culture issues internally. But really the big issue at that point in time was there was a very active effort to kill the SARE program in late 1994. One of the livestock organizations, which will remain nameless beyond that, had a very active effort to try to get legislation through with another ag organization that would have totally eliminated funding for SARE at that time. So the very first meeting I had to go to before I even got a USDA employee badge was with this livestock organization, and they were quite convinced that SARE was doing nothing for their particular group of farmers. And so we had to show them not only that SARE was funding a lot of livestock work, but I think really the key thing, as has remained true to today, was that we had so many farmers and ranchers involved in our decision making and helping us figure out which grants to fund, and that farmers were getting a lot of our funding directly. So that was a big issue in getting them to kind of back off and relax about the program.
So I like to brag about the program being farmer-driven. And we have farmers and ranchers, because there's a person in this room, I'll go nameless, that keeps saying, I'm not a farmer, I'm a rancher, who certainly supported the program for years and years and years, but they also, because of the way the legislation was written, they are key leadership individuals with our program. And I can remember back when I first started, Tom Trantham was our administrative council chair in the southern region, dairy farmer from South Carolina, Lorraine Pepper, a cotton producer from Texas, Mark Frazier, a rancher from Colorado, and most recently we've had Larry Kundle, who's also a rancher from Wyoming, as the current Regional Administrative Council Chair for the Western SARE region.
And these folks have, played a huge role in how the program runs and the programs they support. But I want to hear kind of a little bit more about those early years when the program kind of struggled a little bit.
Well, one of the things a few folks in the room might remember is anytime you get a new government program, you often get some commentary from the farm media, especially the farm magazine editor-writers. And there was a very early magazine article, I don't remember which of the farm magazines it was, in about 1989, kind of poking fun at the name of the program, which at that time was not SARE, it was the Low Input Sustainable Agriculture, or LISA program, as many would remember. Mm-hmm. And they were basically taking issue with the name, that it was a more feminine name, and that, well, this wasn't something for real farmers, and, just that this was this kind of wimpy LISA program. So what was kind of interesting was in the 1990 Farm Bill, to kind of counteract that negative attitude about the name of LISA, one of the staffers who was involved decided, well, I'm going to fix that. So he said, we're going to call it, instead of low input sustainable agriculture, we're going to call it biologically, let's see, I have to stop and think, biologically based agriculture.
Biological utilization.
Best utilization of biologically agriculture. Okay. So yes. So you know what the acronym was?
So BUBBA.
BUBBA.
So, BUBBA might work well in the southern region, but not so necessarily in some of the other regions.
So fortunately, BUBBA did not catch hold, and it became Sustainable Ag Research and Education. But we weren't finished, because shortly after it became announced that it was SARE, there was another farm magazine editorial. Well, this SARE program is just the same wimpy program by another name, still not for real farmers. So one of my very few edicts that you probably remember, Kim, was that we weren't going to call it SARA, we were going to call it SARE, like we're fair and we care. So eventually that stuck, but I still run into people that call it something else. So.
Yeah, there's some folks I've run to in the South that have that kind of accent, and we're the sorry program. No. Please don't use that.
The irony, Kim, is that whole feminine thing is that those farm magazine writers had no idea that women would play such a huge role, not only in SARE, but the sustainable ag movement. I think of people like Jill Auburn, who's up here, that Jill was our longest serving leader for, I think, over a decade, right, Jill? And many others, Barbara Norman, who's here, many of you know, a blueberry grower and farm leader in Michigan, led our SARE outreach efforts for many years. Beth Nelson in the North Central region's been involved for over a decade with SARE, Margaret Kroll, many people in this room, women that have provided amazing leadership for SARE and just sustainable ag in general. And in fact, I always knew I was at a sustainable ag meeting, especially going back to the 90s, because the room would be half women or more, compared to a lot of the other ag meetings that were 90% men. And I always said that was because the women were smarter, right? They knew where sustainability was where it was at. So anyway, so the farm magazine writers kind of had it wrong in those early years. So Kim, you've been involved for over 22 years now. So what do you recall about those early years kind of coming forward?
So, I just remember the original funding in 1988 was a little less than $4 million, and that gets split up between the 4 regions. So, with that money, very few projects got funded. And so, but we just heard recently, Ferd Hefner announced yesterday the increase that we are now up at $35 million with the recent appropriations bill, which has just found fantastic news. I think that equates to about a 30% increase in our budget overall, and the highest level we've ever had in the SARE program. So we're truly excited about that. So over the years, what some of that additional funding, I mean, it crept along for a little while, and then there was a slight little bump, and then we were level funding for many years, and then another slight little bump. But during those times, it allowed the regional administrative councils to kind of look at the program and say, do we want to just keep funding more projects, or do we want to use those new funds to create new projects? So, some of the things that came into being, in 1992, the first farmer grants were awarded. And then in 2000, to help the next generation of ag researchers, the graduate program got started. And then in 2002, to help Extension and other ag professionals work on farmer-generated ideas, work in a partnership arrangement, the On-Farm Research Program came into being. So it's exciting to see some of these new programs take hold.
And how many grants has SARE funded over the years?
All right, who wants to take a guess? Yes, Lizzie.
6,300.
All right, so she wins somewhat the prize. Some of those grants aren't on our website, so actually we've funded more than 7,000 projects since 1988. And what's even more impressive is that 40% of those or more have been given to farmers and ranchers.
Directly?
Directly. And this is a USDA, we're the only USDA program that was giving funds directly to farmers and ranchers to do research on their farm.
And Kim, you've seen a huge outgrowth in SARE outreach as well.
Yes. So one of the SARE requirements is if you get a grant, how many people have gotten a grant with the SARE program? Oh, wow. Okay. So you all know one of the requirements is that you have to have some sort of outreach effort. So a lot of those are, workshops, field days, and things like that. And those reach a small audience. And so the SARE outreach program is actually there to take those research results and extend them to a broader audience. And when you were the national program leader, Andy Clark, who was our kind of first national outreach communications coordinator, was hired. And Andy oversees a staff that has grown as the program has grown. And I don't know, hopefully everyone has been to the SARE exhibit booth upstairs and seen our catalog, which now has, I think we've got, 16 books, all aimed at a producer audience, over a dozen bulletins, numerous fact sheets, and increasingly we're getting more into video and our website production. So it's been phenomenal to see the growth in that effort. All right, so at this point, I want to welcome Guy and Rex from our NCAT ATTRA to the stage. We've been very grateful to have them as partners for the conference and glad to have ATTRA celebrating 30 years for their program as well. And I believe both programs have performed well in meeting the needs of our farmers and ranchers. So Guy and Rex, it's your show.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I'm going to start. And you got lucky because we're running over time. Because I have nothing less than the history of human civilization here that I was. Seriously, history progresses through thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? And we wouldn't be sustainable agriculture if there hadn't been something unsustainable before. We were met with some opposition, too. And I see a lot of young people out there, and you may or may not know the history of sustainable ag, but we have to acknowledge at least, and I'm going to tear off the first page, that it was unsustainable. Seriously. Let me suggest one book, Topsoil and Civilization, but those of you who are students of agriculture have some idea of where we've been and where we hope we're headed. I am going to start with just a little bit of history because, again, you can't understand. The key, the pivotal question in history is, how did we get here? How did we get to where we are now? And for us at ATTRA, there are certain key thinkers and events that occurred, and one of those thinkers was E.F. Schumacher, a German economist, energy specialist. And he wrote a book called Small is Beautiful, and that inspired the people in Butte, Montana to start the National Center for Appropriate Technology. Soon they spawned an energy information service called NATIS, and that was a 1-800 line that people could call. We had the energy crisis right in there, 1973, 74, OPEC, the first Arab oil embargo, Jimmy Carter was president. It was pretty nuts. And there was an energy crisis in the country. NCAT started this 1-800 service. You could call NCAT, and they would try to help you save energy. Farm crisis happens in 1980. And farmers are trying, it's mostly economics, but energy use in agriculture is intense. And so farmers started calling the NATIS line with how to save money on their agricultural operations. some people at NCAT then got the idea that perhaps we could do the same thing that we're doing with NATIS for agriculture. And the idea of ATTRA, which, by the way, very few of you probably know, appropriate technology, which was a buzz phrase that Schumacher is kind of associated with. Appropriate technology transfer is another one of those buzz phrases of the day, for rural areas. And Bob Gray, a lobbyist with the American Farmland Trust, Peggy Miller with NCAT, we were in Washington, D.C. at that time, put together the idea and started selling it to congresspersons at the Capitol. Kathy Hadley, who is now the NCAT executive director, produced most of the white paper information that you gave to the Congress people to justify the thing, and then it happened. But again, you have to know that what preceded it, so I'm going to throw out a few more names that were important and weren't directly involved in ATTRA. But Wendell Berry, most of us know him as kind of the patron saint of sustainable agriculture. And he's, there's so many books, but the 1977, The Unsettling of America, it was the critique of our agriculture at the time. It still is. It's about our estrangement from the land, spiritually, culturally, and scientifically, agriculturally, whatever you want to say. And that and other writers at that time, like I said, had to throw most of this away. Lucky you. Produced a demand for more information about sustainable ag. We can't forget Rodell. We can't forget Rachel Carson. All these people produced a demand among the public for information in sustainable agriculture. And ATTRA then really, in large degree, was a response to that. It really came in very many ways. We can say we're a grassroots organization responding to the demand for this kind of information. Well, it had never been done before, of course. So even though there was this NATIS program that was modeled after, the agricultural information was going to be different, and because, as the SARE people know, there wasn't a lot of research-based, peer-reviewed information in sustainable ag to rely on. It was tough. It was really tough because we were committed from the start to give the best possible information, the most reliable information, practical information to our callers. So we had to rely on farmer-to-farmer information. We would, if some farmer called us for information, we might have to contact another farmer. A lot of grade literature, a lot of stuff from Organic Farming or Organic Gardening magazine, which wasn't always that reliable, to be perfectly honest, and other things like that. It was tough. It was really difficult to do all this, but we put together a good staff of ag professionals, most of us young at that time. It's been 30 years, and I was there near the beginning, and I don't think there's a whole lot more that I want to say about that at this point, except that this was pre-internet. We're an information dissemination service. So we were paper-based, we were phone-based, and it was a madhouse. We had no web page there weren't no Facebook, no web pages to be had when we started. It was pretty crazy. And I'm glad we survived. I feel like we served our constituency, and I'm very proud to be a part of this organization that has been able to provide this information for this 30 years. You want to tell them a little bit more, Rex?
Sure.
The slides, we got the slides going yet?
Well,
yeah. Okay, good.
Okay. So when I started, Guy didn't mention, but he started in 1989. I came on after working overseas in 1994, and it was so long ago that I remember when Guy's hair was red, and his mustache and beard were red too. So, and at that time, ATTRA was just in one office in Fayetteville, Arkansas. It had started off in Memphis, Tennessee, and then moved to Fayetteville, Arkansas after some interesting congressional machinations. As you said, we're paper-based. We had 2 folks on phones at that time. 2 folks we had a primary and a backup because we were a call-in service, information dissemination, pre-website, you know, pre-World Wide Web. So word got out about ATTRA.
Mother News.
Yeah, small articles. I remember National Geographic when they had Good Humus as a cover in 1997. It was like, yes, organic. We finally made it, you know. But in 1994, organics and sustainable ag, as you know, Lisa and some of these other programs was viewed very, very skeptically, and we would get calls from farmers around the country wanting to do organics, and we'd always say, well, you know, check with your local extension service. And, oh no, they said we can't do that here. So I think we've come a long way from that point, but at that time, you know, organics, where would you go? You know, there's SARE, which was probably about as well known as ATTRA. But we are one office in Fayetteville, Arkansas. In contrast to today, we have 6 offices scattered around the country. We were a very unique collection of individuals and skill sets at that time. And I think that's holds true for today. But the informational ecology at that time, there were a few plants, if you can look at it that way. Now it's become a much more diverse informational ecosystem, which is, I think, in part due to SARE as well as ATTRA and the work everybody has done in that regard. We had, everything was snail mail, so people would call in, farmers would call in with a question, we'd develop a response, it went through editorial review, it went through technical review, and then we'd send it out through snail mail. I remember about 1996, there was a serious discussion about, well, should we develop a web page? And it was, I was thinking, wow, you know, I wonder if they had this discussion when, you know, the phone was developed, you know, like, what's it going to be used for, you know? And before I go on, I would like, you know, when I started in 1994, the program manager, the project manager was Jim Lukens. And Jim, would you stand up just for... You know, Jim had the task of herding these, this very disparate, unique group of characters and trying to head them kind of in one direction. And good job, Jim. And, you know, we didn't have any publications initially. It was all like, we had what we called standard letters. We'd send them out, kind of update them, revise them with the gray literature. We had this huge set of gray literature that we'd flag and put in what we called vertical files. It was a very, very different informational access system back then.
You know, if you remember, one of the reasons we didn't have publications is because we had no time. Where we were a reactive organization, people would call on the phone. We had a case now. We had hundreds of cases a week come in. Yeah. Jim's going,
Yeah.
It was crazy. We were dog paddling, trying to keep our heads above water. No time to take the big strokes and produce publications.
Yeah. But ultimately, we started developing these standard letters into something more like publications, because we didn't have time to write all these standard letters again and again. And so we developed the website. Steve Diver, who's now with University of Kentucky, their manager of their student farm, he was just one of our technical specialists, very geeky. And I remember, you know, guys shared an office with him. He had boxes of files, which I don't think he ever accessed ultimately, but, you know, he had boxes of files about technical information just so in case he needed to have something, he could access it. And he was our first web developer, just a technical specialist with an interest in getting information out there. And now we have a website that has probably over 400 different types of publications, videos, podcasts, webinars. you name it, which complements a lot of what SARE does. But we also have these toll-free lines in English and in Spanish that farmers can call in and talk to a live person, and this is a pretty unique service, talk to a live person about whatever question they have about organic or sustainable production or marketing of crops and livestock. And we'll get something to them, hopefully within 24 hours. We'll get them at least some kind of response within 24 hours. Still a very unique service, and I think a very underutilized service. And development, development back in the day, I mean, we just didn't do it. I went to work for ATTRA, and we were focused on ATTRA, and one of the first big development projects I remember was this Tulelake Project. It was a fish and wildlife refuge up in Tulelake, and the Fish and Wildlife Service was being sued by an outfit called National Coalition for Alternatives to Pesticides, NCAT. And they put out an RFP. We got wind of it. Kathy Hadley and myself and a few others at ATTRA wrote up a proposal and responded to it. We heard later from the point person at Fish and Wildlife Service that they sent it out to 21 organizations, and we responded. They told us, you got the grant. I was, oh, great, that's great. We'll go out and, checked out the Tulelake, and it was only later that we found out that we were the only one that responded to the RFP for whatever reason. It sounded kind of dangerous. It was my first encounter with the wise use movement as well, so that was interesting context up there. And plus, the farmers did not greet us with open arms very well because they had heard NCAT, the people that were suing the Fish and Wildlife Service for, allowing use of pesticides on this refuge, had gotten the grant, not NCAT. So there was anyway, those development days, we've now, each one of our offices has several non-ATTRA kinds of projects they're working on thanks to good farm bills, the Beginning Farmer Rancher, RMA, you name it, across the board, a lot of these sustainable... Farmer Veteran Coalition, or Farmer Outreach and Assistance to Socially Disadvantaged Farmers and Veterans. Mm-hmm. Lots of different programs that have evolved over the years. But still, it's been an interesting transition in the use of technology to transfer. It's really a game changer, and it's interesting in YouTube has really been a game changer along with the web, but the YouTube having audio as well as visual to transfer information, that is really become a game changer. And I think Sarah mentioned they're using videos and et cetera, and I think that's going to be the wave of the future as far as information transfer, because people imbibe information, audio and visual. So I think that's all I have to say about that.
The next 30 years.
The next 30 years.
The only thing I have to say about that is I kind of started off with talking about the, excuse me for sounding so high-minded, the Hegelian Dialectic. It's this idea that history progresses with thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. The thesis, if you look at it that way, was conventional ag, or ag as it had been done up until, let's say, 1900 or pre-Dust Bowl or something like that. The antithesis is us. We're the antithesis. In fact, it was alternative ag for a short period of time, but even before it was Lisa. What's going to happen next, and this is just the way history works, is there will be a synthesis, and it's happening now. We don't have nearly the opposition that we did when we started off. Our ideas, the theories are not theories anymore. They're proven, they're becoming even more proven, they're becoming widely, broadly accepted. we're trying to work towards a sustainable regenerative society. At some point, our ideas will be synthesized, will become the new synthesis, and who knows what will happen next, what will be the next antithesis. Maybe we'll go back to
30 years.
unsustainable. Thank you very much.